Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello, everyone. How's life? Yeah, we hope that we are in a good condition. Okay, for today's topic is Augustan and Age of Sensibility. And yeah, we are from Group 5, and our members are Hikmatun Nazila, Nabilla Fadena, Ike Astriani, Prianik Anjarwati, Ahmad Tri Wahyudi, and Kaffah Alvionita. So let's get started.
Okay, I'll tell you about the first material. I'll explain about Augustan literary. The term literary work of the August period comes from writers around the 18th century during the reign of George I of England. The writers say that the literary work of the time are a reflection of the great works of the reign of Emperor Augustus in ancient Rome. In this period, it was full of the spirit of creativity which was reflected in the British, Scottish, and Irish people who found themselves in the midst of economic progress, with opportunities in education and the industrial revolution which result in advance in science. So that is also affected the form or type of literary work. Some of his work at the time were poetry, drama, and prose, including novels. And then we go to characteristic of literature works for our period. The desire for system and order in writing is the main characteristic of literary works of this period. The great works of the reign of Emperor Augustus in ancient Rome were the makeup for British authors of this period. Other characteristics are a clear, accurate, simple, and uniform language style, and the impression of eliminating individuality are demands that must be fulfilled by a literary work in order to be accepted by society. Literary work of this period also had a tendency to intellectualize literary work due to the influence of the Industrial Revolution. And then we go to Age of Sensibility. This period is known as the Age of Sensibility, but it is also sometimes described as the Age of Johnson. And in Age of Sensibility, there are any precursors of Romanticism. The Romantic movement in English literature of the early 19th century has its roots in 18th century poetry, the Gothic novel, and the novel of sensibility. Um, it celebrates the emotional and intellectual concept of sentiment, sentimentalism, and sensibility. Sentimentalism, which is to be distinguished from sensibility, was a fashion in both poetry and prose fiction which began in the 18th century in reaction to the rationalism of the Augustan age. Okay, actually, Augustine literature, sometimes referred to misleadingly as Georgian literature, is a style of British literature produced during the reign of Queen Anne, King George I, and George II in the first half of the 18th century and ending in the 1740 with the death of Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift in 1744 and 1745, respectively. It was a literary epoch that featured the rapid development of the novel, an explosion in satire, the mutation of drama from political satire into melodrama, and an evolution toward poetry of personal exploration. In philosophy, it was an age increasingly dominated by empirism, while in the writings of political economy, it marked the evolution of mercantilism as a formal philosophy, the development of capitalism, and the term of truth. And then next, the material.
Okay, I want to explain about historical. Alexander Pope, who had been imitating Horace and exploited two Augustus that were in fact addresses to George II of Great Britain, and seemingly endorsed the notion of his act being like that of Augustus when poetry became more mannered, political, and satirical than in the era of Julius Caesar. Jadi, Alexander Pope itu telah meniru Horst untuk menulis sebuah surat kepada August yang sebenarnya ditujukan kepada George II yang berasal dari Inggris Raya. Dan tampaknya George II itu mendukung gagasan si Alexander Pope ini. Dan ketika puisi menjadi santun, politis, dan satir daripada di era Julius Caesar. Outside Portugal, however, the Augustan era is generally known by other names, partially because of the rise of empiricism and particularly because of the self-conscious naming of the act in terms of extending room to rather impress labor have been averse to act. One is that it is the act of necessity, the other is that it is the act of reason. While neoclassical practice from France was imported to English later, the English had abandoned their strictures in all but name by the 70-80 critics disagree over the applicability of the concept of the Enlightenment to the literary history of this period. Donald Green agreed for the act so rather we know the act as Egbert and T. S. White made a case from the act of scandal. Jadi di luar puisi, bagaimanapun di era Augustus umumnya dikenal dengan nama lain. Sebagian karena kebangkitan empiris dan sebagian karena penamaan usia secara sadar diri dalam istilah Roma kuno. Dua label yang agak tidak tepat telah ditempelkan pada zaman itu. Salah satunya pada zaman neoklassikisme, yaitu adalah zaman bahwa Act of Reason. Sementara kritik neoklasik dari Prancis diimpor ke huruf-huruf Inggris. Di mana Inggris telah meninggalkan semua pembatasan mereka kecuali namanya pada tahun 1720-an. Para kritiskus tidak setuju atas penerapan konsep pencerahannya. Pada sejarah sastra period ini, Donald Green dengan tegas menyatakan bahwa zaman yang seharusnya lebih dikenal sebagai The Act of Exuberance dan T. S. White mengajukan kasus untuk The Act of Scandal. Next, one of the most critical elements of the 18th century was the increasing availability of print material both from reader and author. Book fell in price, dramatical and used books were sold at Birth, Holmeo Fair, and other fairs. Jadi salah satu elemen yang terpenting pada abad ke-18 itu meningkatnya ketersediaan materi cetak baik untuk pembaca maupun menulis. Namun, harga buku sangat turun drastis dan buku bekas dijual di Bartholomew Fair dan pameran lainnya. The positive side of the explosion in the information was that the 18th century was markedly more generally educative than the centuries before. Education was less confined to the upper classes than it had been in prior centuries, so contribution to science, philosophy, economics, and literature came from all parts of the kingdom. It was the first time that literacy and library were all that stood between a person and education. It was act of enlightenment in the sense that the insistence and drive for reasonable explanations of nature and mankind was a rag. It was a act of reason. In the it was a that accepted clear rational method as superior to tradition. Jadi di sisi positif dari ledakan informasi ini adalah bahwa pada abad ke-18 lebih berpendidikan daripada abad sebelumnya. Jadi pendidikan tidak terbatas pada kelas atas daripada di abad-abad sebelumnya, sehingga kontribusi untuk sains, filsafat, ekonomi, dan sastra datang dari semua bagian kerajaan. Ini adalah pertama kalinya literasi dan perpustakaan menjadi penghalang antara manusia dan pendidikan, yaitu pada zaman pencerahan. Artinya bahwa desakan dan dorongan untuk penjelasan yang masuk akal tentang alam dan umat manusia, yaitu adalah suatu kemarahan. Dan pada zaman nalar, yaitu adalah zaman yang menerima metode yang jelas dan rasional sebagai yang lebih unggul dari tradisi. Okay, next, political and religious. The Restoration period ended with the Exclusion Crisis and the Glorious Revolution, where Parliament set up a new rule for succession to the British throne that will always prefer protestation over consanguinity that had brought William III and Mary II to the throne instead of James II, and that was codified in the Acts of Settlement 1701. James had fled to France from where his son, James Francis Edward Stuart, launched an attempt to retake the throne in 1715. Another attempt was lost by the latter son Charles Edward Stuart in 1745. Years, the attempt in invasion are often referred to as the 15 and the 45. Jadi di periode restorasi ini berakhir dengan krisis eksklusif dan revolusi kejayaan, di mana parlemen menetapkan aturan baru untuk suksesi tahta Inggris yang akan selalu lebih memilih Protestan daripada kerabatnya sendiri. Dan hal itu membawa William ketiga dan Mary kedua naik tahta alih-alih James kedua. Dan itu dikodifikasi dari Acts of Statement tahun 1701, dan James telah melarikan diri ke Prancis, dari mana putranya James Francis Edward Stuart meluncurkan upaya untuk merebut kembali tahta di tahun 1715. Upaya lainnya diluncurkan oleh putra terakhir Charles Edward Stuart pada tahun 1745. Upaya invasi yang sering disebut sebagai upaya 15 dan 45. Next, when William died, Anne Stuart came to the throne. Anne's race southwards and a great triumph by John Scorsese, the Duke of Marlborough. Marlborough's wife Sarah Scorsese was Anne's best friend, and many suppose that she secretly controlled the Queen in every respect, with the belief that true power rested in the hand of the leading minister. The two factions of politics stepped up their opposition to each other, and Wick and Tony were at its oldest throat. Jadi ketika William meninggal, Anne Stuart itu naik tahta, dan pemerintahan Anne itu melihat dua perang dan kemenangan besar oleh John Scorsese, Duke of Marlborough. Dan istrinya Marlborough, Sarah Churchill, adalah sahabatnya Anne. Dan banyak yang mengira bahwa si Anne ini diam-diam mengendalikan ratu dalam segala hal, dengan keyakinan bahwa kekuatan sejati ada di tangan para menteri terkemuka. Kemudian faksi politik yang meningkatkan oposisi mereka satu sama lain, yaitu Whig dan Tory yang berada di tenggorokan satu sama lainnya. The weakness at the throne will lead quickly to the expansion of the powers of the party leader in parliament and the establishment in all but name of the prime minister office in the form of Robert Walpole. Dan di sini kelemahan di tata itu segera mengarah pada perluasan kekuasaan pemimpin partai di parlemen dan pembentukan di semua kecuali nama kantor Perdana Menteri dalam bentuk Robert Walpole. When Anne died without suppressing issue, George I, Elector of Hanover, came to the throne. Dan ketika Anne meninggal tanpa masalah apapun, George I, Elector of Hanover, itu naik tahta. Satire in prose, drama, and poetry was the genre that attracted the most energetic and voluminous writing. The satire that were produced during the Augustan period were exceptionally gentle and non-specific commentary on the comically flavored human condition, but they were at least as frequently specific critiques of, of specific policies, action, and person. Even the words studiedly non-topical were in fact transparently political statements in the 18th century. Jadi dalam santile dalam prosa, drama, dan puisi, yaitu adalah genre yang paling menarik, tulisan paling energik dan produktif. Saat ini yang diproduksi selama periode Augustan ini kadang-kadang lembut, kadang-kadang tidak spesifik. Namun komentar tentang kondisi manusia yang cacat secara lucu, tetapi setidaknya itu adalah kritik yang spesifik terhadap kebijakan, tindakan, dan orang-orang tertentu. Bahkan karya-karya yang sangat non-topikal sebenarnya merupakan pernyataan politik yang transparan pada abad ke-18.
Okay guys, for the next material is about prose. The essay, satire, and dialogue thrive in the age, and the English novel was truly began as a serious art form. Literacy in the early 18th century passed into the working classes, as well as the middle and upper classes. Furthermore, literacy was not confined to men. Third, rights of female literacy are very difficult to establish. For those who were literate, culting libraries in England began in the Augustan period. Libraries were open to all, but they were mainly associated with female patronic and novel reading. Jadi, pada zaman ini, zamannya Augustan ini, esai, satir, dan dialog yang dalam bentuk filsafat dan agama sangatlah berkembang pesat. Dan juga novel-novel Inggris benar-benar dimulai kembali atau dibentuk kembali sebagai suatu bentuk seni yang sangatlah serius. Kemudian, pada awal abad ke-18 ini, literasi diteruskan ke kelas pekerja serta kelas menengah dan atas. Dan lebih jauhnya lagi, literasi juga tidak terbatas untuk para laki-laki. Akan tetapi, pada perempuan sangatlah sulit ditentukan. Bagi mereka yang mengerti tentang literasi, seperti laki-laki yang tadi, yang tidak terbatas pada laki-laki, perpustakaan yang beredar di Inggris pada periode Augustan ini mulai dibuka kembali dan terbuka untuk umum. Akan tetapi, sebagian besar masih terkait dengan perlindungan wanita dan juga tentang membaca novel. And the next is essays and journalism. English essays were of continental models, but they developed from independently from the tradition, and periodical literature grew between 1692 and 1712. Joseph Edison and Richard Steele written The Spectator. The Spectator is one periodical outsold and dominated all others, but Edison and Steele create fiction to surround their narrators. The dispassionate view of the world said the pose of spectator rather than participant was essential for development of the English essay, as it set a ground wherein edition and still could comment and meditate upon manners and events. After the success of the Spectator, more political periodicals of comment appeared. However, the political faction and coalition of politicians very quickly realized the power of this type of press, and they began founding newspapers to spread rumors. Jadi, pada zaman Augustan ini, para penulis esai Inggris sudah mengetahui tentang model kontinental, akan tetapi mereka lebih mengembangkan bentuknya secara independen dari tradisi itu, dan literatur ini pun berkembang antara tahun 1692 dan 1712. Terbitan pada periode Augustan ini tidaklah mahal untuk diproduksi, cepat dibaca, dan cara yang layak untuk mempengaruhi opini publik. Dan akibatnya ada banyak terbitan lebar yang dipimpin oleh seorang penulis tunggal dan dikelola oleh orang sewaan yang disebut penulis Group Street. Akan tetapi, satu majalah terjual lebih banyak dan mendominasi yang lainnya, yaitu adalah The Spectator, yang ditulis oleh Joseph Edison dan Richard Steele dengan kontribusi sesekali dari teman-teman mereka. The Spectator mengembangkan sejumlah karakter nama sama termasuk Mr. Spectator, Roger de Coverley, dan Isaac Bixortif. Baik Addison maupun Steele menciptakan visi untuk mengelilingi narator mereka. Akan tetapi, pandangan dunia tidak memihak bahwa posisi sebagai penonton bukan peserta sangatlah penting dalam pengembangan esai bahasa Inggris. Maka dari itu, Addison dan Steele meletakkan landasan di mana agar Addison dan Steele dapat berkomentar dan merenungkan tata krama dan peristiwa tersebut. Kemudian Samuel Johnson dalam kebijaksanaan praktisnya mendapat mengikuti yang banyak saat ia menerbitkan lebih dari 200 esai yang tentang sifat manusia dan ketekunan moral. Setelah melihat kesuksesan di Spectator ini, muncullah para faksi politik dan koalisi politik dengan cepat menyadari kekuatan pres ini, dan mereka pun mulai mendanai surat kabar untuk menyebarkan rumor. Pada Kementerian Tory Robert Hurley di tahun 1710 sampai 1714 dilaporkan telah menghabiskan lebih dari 50.000 pound sterling untuk membuat dan menyewa pers agar The Spectator ini tidaklah kuat seperti dahulu lagi.
Alright, I'm gonna explain about the aspect of dictionaries and lexicons in the period of Augustine. this period is called the Age of Enlightenment or Age of Reason, but but why? Why it's called like that? Because in this period, a rational and scientific approach to religious, social, political, and economic issues that promoted a secular view of the world and a general sense of progress and perfectibility. So that's why it's called Enlightenment. But however, the English language was deteriorating or break down into a tangled mess. So, because of that issue, at that time, a group of London booksellers commissioned the well-known essayist. He is Samuel Johnson, an English essayist, a writer, a poet, a literary critic. He is awesome, obviously. So the booksellers asked him to set up rules governing the English language, and after 9 years and the help of 6 assistants, finally the first edition of a dictionary of the English language was published in 1755, and his dictionary defines in detail with descriptions of their various uses and numerous literary quotes as illustrations. Johnson's great knowledge of letters, words, and literature brought uniqueness to his dictionary, and uh, it contains the dictionary contains around 40,000 words and nearly 114,000 quotes. Because this great dictionary, a warm reception greeted Johnson's dictionary as it was the first dictionary that could be read with pleasure. Each word full of wit and depth of thought, supported by passages from beloved poets and philosophers, which a reader could be content spending an evening poring over its pages. And then this dictionary became certainly shaped future English dictionaries, in this modern era, like that. Alright, and then the aspects of philosophy and religious in the Augustan period. So in this aspect, there is a movement. It's called evangelical, or in Indonesia, it's called Gerakan Injili. So this movement dilatar belakangi because at that time, religion in the age of Pope was deistic, formal, utilitarian, and unspiritual. So that's why there is this movement known as Methodism that led by Wesley and Whitefield. And so the old formalism and utilitarianism was abandoned, was disappeared, and the evangelical movement spread rapidly among the poor all over England, and it became particularly strong in the industrial towns around the year 1739. And how about the literature? So in this time, the famous writer was Daniel Defoe. He is an England trader, writer, journalist, and also a spy. So mysterious and fantastic, right? And what made his writing is controversy at this time, because his writing with the title is The Shortest Way with the Dissenters. So this writing is satirical because it attacking all of the worries of establishment figures over the challenges of dissenters. So yeah, in this period there is a dissenters that against the coronation of Queen Anne, Queen of England, and Daniel's writing is defensive about the dissenters. And how about the philosophy? At this time, the philosophy was fully dominated by John Locke. By John Locke's view, he is a philosopher, of course, and had a vigorous competition among his followers. Why? Because his followers have various different viewed different thought about the philosophy, so it became a war in the internal of John Locke's followers, like that.
The novel. The ground for the novel had been laid by journalism, drama, and satire. Long-burst satires like Swift's Gulliver's Travels 17 and 26 had a central characters who goes through adventures and may or may not learn lessons. However, the most important single satirical source for the writing of novels came from Cervantes' Don Quixote. In general, one can see these three axes, drama, journalism, and satire, as blending in and giving rise to three different types of novel. As we know that Daniel Davis Robinson Crusoe, 17 and 19, was the first major novel of the new century and was published in more editions than any other works beside Gulliver's Travel Mulan 252. And then as we knew that the future aspect of the actual life, and from that through narrated and functional life satisfying an essentially journalistic market with his function. We can know that in the 1000 is it the who interviewed famous criminals and produced account of their lives. And then there is the sentimental novel or novel of sentiment. You can see on the PPT that is developed after 70 and 40, and among the most famous examples in English are Samuel Richardson's Pamela or Virtue Rewarded 70 and 40, Oliver Goldsmith's Vicar of Wakefield in 70 and 66, and then you can read all of the names on the PPT until 70 and 74. It's like the Goose novel for the sorrow of young widows. And then so from that, the midst of this development of the novel, other trends were also taking place. Women were writing novels and moving away from the old romance plots that had dominated before restorations. As we know that there were utopian novels like Sarah Scott's Millennium Hall that is in 1970 and 62, autobiographical women's novels like Frances Burney's work, female adaptations of older male motifs such as Charlotte Lennox's and the female Quasi and 7052, and then actually there are many others the example. Maybe that you can look for some resources, or maybe you can search on the internet. It will publish over there and you can see it and you can read it. Okay, and then the next. For the next is the chapter. It is an illustration from Jonathan Swift's A Tale of a Tube, showing the three stages of human life: the pulpit, the theatre, and the gallows. The Augustan era is considered a high point of British satiric writing, and its masterpieces were Swift's Gulliver's Travel and A Modest Proposal, Pope's Dunciad, Horatius' Imitation, and Moral Essay. Samuel Johnson, The Vanity of Human Wishes, and London. Actually, and there are many cases that it is mentioned the name in on the PPT. Then there's John Gay's The Beggar's Opera, and then actually there were several thousand other satirical works written during the period, which have until recently been by widespread consensus. Do you know that the first major satire it is the Swift's Swift's first major satire was A Tale of a Thought. It is in 73 until 75, which introduced an ancient modern division that would serve as a distinction between the old and the new conception of value. The modern thought creates empirical science, the individuals reason above the societies, while the ancients believed in inherent and immanent value of birth. And the society offered the individuals the determinations of the good. So that, as you know, that the Swedes is first major, and then maybe that you can see also then you search in internet you can read that the satire it is the platform the 742 deluxe edition, and then there are many scholars of the era argue that a single name overshadowed all other in 18th century prose satire, that is Jonathan Swift. Swift wrote poetry as well as prose, and his satires rank over all topics. Critically, Swift's satire marked the development of prose parody away from simple satire or burlesque. A burlesque or lament in prose would imitate a despiced author and quickly move to reduction ad absurdum by having the victim say things coarse or idiotic. On the other hand, other satires would argue against a habit, practice, or policy by making fun of its rituals or composition or methods. What Swift did was to combine parody with its imitation of form and style of another and satire in prose. Particularly after Swift's success, parodic satire had an attraction for authors throughout the 18th century. A variety of factors created a rise in political writing and political satire, and Robert Walpole's success and domination House of Commons was a very effective proximal cause for polarized literature and thereby the rise of parodic satire. It was an ideal method of attack for ironists and conversatives, those who would not be able to enunciate a set of value change to words, but could term present change as ill-considered.
Well, the next one we're gonna talk about poetry. In the Augustan era, poets wrote in direct counterpoint and direct expansion of one another, with each poet writing satire when in opposition. There was a great struggle over the nature and role of the pastoral in the early part of century, reflecting two simultaneous movements: the invasion of the subject self as a worthy topic, with the emergence of a priority on individual psychology against the insistence on all acts of art being performance and public gesture designed for the benefit of society at large. The development, seemingly agreed upon by both sides, was a gradual adaptation of all forms of poetry from their older uses. Let's see the eminent writers of the period. Well, the first one is the most popular writers of the period. He is Alexander Pope. For your information, the entire Augustan age's poetry was dominated by him. He is the representative poet of Augustan age. His influence dominated even many foreign writers, and the majority of English poets looked to him as their model. And his famous works are Pastorals, an essay in criticism, Windsor Forest, and the last one is The Rape of the Lock. And the second one is Dr. Samuel Johnson. He was the acknowledged dictator in the contemporary literature, and his famous works are London and the Vanity of Human Vices. Well, other poets who deserve mention are Matthew Prior, John Gray, and Edward Young. Jadi seperti yang sudah dijelaskan tadi bahwasanya pada puisi di era Augustan ini didominasi oleh Alexander Pope, hingga banyak sekali penulis-penulis asing menjadikan Alexander Pope ini sebagai role model mereka. The next one is Precursors of Romanticism. When the Romantics emerged at the end of 18th century, they were not assuming a radically new invention of the subjective self themselves, but merely formalizing what had gone before. Similarly, the later 18th century was a ballad revival with Thomas Percy's Religions of Ancient English Poetry. The relics were not always very ancient, as many of the ballads dated from only 17th century, for example, Beckford Ballads or The Dragon of Wantley in Percy Folio. And so what began as an antiquarian movement soon became a folk movement. When this folk-inspired impulse combined with the solitary and individualistic impulse of the circuit poets, Romanticism was nearly inevitable. Last but not least, we're gonna talk about drama. Augustan period is an arid period in dramatic literacy works. The only two writers who deserve to be mentioned here are John Kay, who wrote The Beggar of Opera, published in 1728 and is a satirical play on Italian operas. And the second one is George Lillo, with his The London Merchant or The History of George Barnwell, which was published in 1731, which is a social drama. Ya, seperti yang sudah tadi disebutkan, bahwasanya di era Augustan ini penulis atau literasi dalam drama itu sangatlah sedikit hingga sampai disebut sebagai arid period atau periode gersang karya-karya mengenai drama. Jadi banyak yang mengatakan atau sumber-sumber banyak mengatakan hanya ditemukan dua penulis terkenal di literasi drama ini, yaitu John Gay dan George Lillo. So yeah, those are our explanations, and we hope that you get any information and you understand about the explanation. And if you have any question, just feel free to give us questions. We are so happy for answering your questions. And the last we say, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.